Hello and welcome to this screencast. My name's Kate Zielinski and I'm one of the Academic Learning Advisors at the Skills Centre. I'll be talking you through this session, introducing you to the key features of academic writing. This session is introductory and aims to give a broad overview rather than going into depth on topics such as critical writing or structuring written work. However, the Skills Centre does offer online resources and webinars on these and other topics which you may wish to explore after watching this screencast. But by the end of this session, you should have a clear idea of what differentiates academic writing from other types of writing, and also be aware of some effective techniques for structuring your writing and using language in an appropriate way. This will include how to signpost the reader and refer appropriately to research and evidence to back up what you're saying. One of the common misconceptions I come across in my day-to-day work with students is the idea that you're not supposed to have or express an opinion in your writing. Certainly, your tutors are not wanting to read your uninformed or ill-considered opinions that you might express in an informal way before having really looked into a subject or considered the evidence carefully. But if your writing only contains descriptions of what other people have written or said about a topic, then this also misses something important about the nature of academic writing. When answering an assignment question, you should ask yourself, what am I bringing to this assignment? What is my take on the subject, having carefully considered the evidence and opinion that is out there? What is your argument? What are you saying about this topic or question? This is also known as your academic voice. In this way, each assignment that a tutor reads should be different, as each person will have come to their own judgment about the topic. If you fail to express this argument or this thinking, then you have missed one of the key features of what academic writing is about. So yes, we want you to think and to write about what you think, but your opinion should be as objective and unbiased as possible, based on the evidence you have read and a logical approach to considering what you think that evidence shows. And we express our opinion or our academic voice in the third person in academic writing, talking about he, she, it, rather than using phrases like I think. So we might express this as it can be seen that, or the evidence strongly suggests that. It's important to tackle the reading before starting to draft the assignment. Whilst it is tempting to start typing anything, onto that blank Word document, good, clear academic writing needs to be well researched and interpreted beforehand. We need an understanding of areas of agreement and differences in the literature before beginning to write. We need to do the hard thinking work before writing up our assignment in terms of identifying shared issues from articles, determining any relevant important differences, summarising areas of agreement and difference, and deciding where we think the evidence is pointing. Completing the thinking first makes academic writing a much smoother and less stressful process. It means you don't have to do this type of complex thinking at the same time as trying to find the right words to express your ideas. You're going to use the question that you've been set to guide your reading. You can find out more on understanding and interpreting assignment questions and on planning and structuring your work in our Planning and Structuring Assignments webinar or screencast and the associated online study guides. But for the purpose of this session, just briefly, it's important to interpret the question, i.e. work out what is it you're being asked to do. You should look for instruction words such as evaluate or analyse, and then clearly identify the topic. What are you being asked to evaluate or analyse? From here, you can start to note down what you already know about the topic and your initial views about the question. But keep an open mind. Then start looking on your reading list and in the library gateway for literature that discusses the topic and compare it with your initial ideas. Look for alternative views on the topic that may contradict your initial view. The key here is that you need to have research evidence from reading to put into your academic writing, otherwise it's not academic. Academic writing uses references from reliable, high-quality academic publications, such as what we call peer-reviewed journals, and from academic textbooks. Don't rely on the internet for your evidence, as of course it's possible for anyone to put stuff up on the internet. There's no real quality control. Be selective in your reading though. You won't be able to read everything you find. Think about how what you have found may help you to answer your question. So we've established that you need to have an academic voice in your writing, in which you express what you think about the evidence you have found. But in order to identify what you think about the evidence, you need to view it critically. This means not accepting things at face value, or put simply, not believing everything you read. Rather, you need to question everything. Look for assumptions or alternative explanations for what the research is showing. Look for weaknesses in the arguments put forward by others. Perhaps be cynical. So, what kind of questions should you be asking? Well, for example, you may have read a research paper which identifies that online learning widens the attainment gap between students of different socioeconomic backgrounds. You might ask yourself, why is this important? What does it matter? What does it mean for education or for society? So rather than just accepting at face value that this is a truth, we need to start questioning the meaning of this information or these findings. So in short, so what that this is the case? Who cares? What difference does it make? And then we can start thinking about, well, what next? What should happen? What will happen? You might also want to question how the research was conducted. So perhaps what methods were used and whether you think they were the most appropriate. Maybe how many people were included in the study, as things like this can impact on how much you might trust the findings. Think about those beauty product adverts which, in really small print at the bottom, confess that the claims are based on 80% of 11 women agreeing that the product is effective. When you find out that the surveys only included 11 women, we do start to feel more doubtful about the findings that are being presented. So you need to bring the same kind of questioning approach to your academic reading. You need to ask and attempt to answer these kinds of questions in your academic writing in order to express your academic voice, what you think about the evidence. Otherwise, it just becomes a bland summary of someone else's thinking with no academic voice of your own. We have a whole set of resources on critical thinking and advanced critical thinking and writing, so if you want to know more about those topics or more in depth than what we've got time for here, I would encourage you to access those resources. So when you've done your reading and thinking and you've decided what it is you want to write in your assignment, this slide can provide a really nice structure which you can use for each of the main body paragraphs of your assignment. If you think about each paragraph having 3 sections or 3 voices, then that can provide a really key structure that will ensure you get all the essential information. So the tour guide voice is the voice that informs the reader where you're taking them. So the reader should know from the first sentence of your paragraph what the main point or topic of that paragraph will be. So just as the tour guide introduces you to what we're going to be seeing today, the first sentence in your paragraph should do the same. Secondly, the second section is where you're going to provide some evidence to support the point that you have made in your tour guide voice section. You're bringing in the voice of the experts, the people who have written the works that you've been reading. Thirdly, the critical voice, or your academic voice, is the section where you start to show that you are making some sense of the evidence. You are asking questions such as, so what? Why is this important? And attempting to answer them in your writing. Often, the so what will seem very obvious to you, and you may feel that the reader should know what is implied, but never assume that the reader will know what you're implying or getting at. Imagine that you're writing for a reader that knows nothing about the topic, as this will force you to always include a critical voice. It's worth noting that a trap some students fall into is that they include a tour guide voice and an expert voice, referring to lots of evidence that they've been reading, but then just move on to a new paragraph. If you do this, all you will have done really is describe a point and then describe what someone else has said about that point. There's no criticality. This is when you may get feedback comments such as, "You're being too descriptive," or "Please be more critical." Critical writing is what's required for the higher grades, and so using this model, this paragraph structure, can really remind you to include that critical voice in every paragraph. So this slide gives some examples of the kind of language you might expect to use or to see in each of the three parts of the paragraph. So just to give you some ideas about how to make a start really. So each of the main body paragraphs within your assignment should ideally follow this template. And if you do follow this template, what you'll be demonstrating is clear, critical writing that uses evidence to support claims that you're making. And this is what's going to help you to meet various assessment marking criteria, such as having a clear structure or being concise, or using relevant evidence, being critical. It's also a really useful structure to ensure that you remain on point, and it reduces the risk of going off on a writing tangent, which can really eat into your word count. It keeps your focus on the topic for each paragraph, as well as ensuring that you refer to evidence and that you express your academic voice. So, you are going to be referring quite a lot to the work of others in your academic writing, certainly in that expert voice section of each paragraph. So the next couple of slides are aiming to give you some pointers about how to do this appropriately. Academic writing is formal in its style, so this should be reflected in the words we use when we introduce the work of other authors and academics. Avoid using phrases like "she says" or "she thinks" when explaining what you've found in your reading. Instead, you can be a bit more specific. By carefully choosing a word to introduce the view of another author, you can give an indication as to what you think about the strength or the quality of their work, and this helps to show your academic voice. So, for example, if you choose a word like "suggests," you're indicating that either you or the author themselves is quite cautious about the findings or what they're saying. It's quite a tentative word. Contrast that with a word like "maintains" or "advocates." These have more strength, and they suggest that perhaps the author has faced some criticisms about their viewpoint, but is sticking to their line of thinking despite these criticisms. Another really common error I see in students' writing when they introduce the work of others is a grammar error in which the wrong form of the verb, that's the word "suggests" or "maintains," is used. So when the author is one individual, we use the singular form of the verb. So Khan states, he states, he is one person, he states. But when there are multiple authors, we should use the plural form of the verb. So Khan and Jones state, or they state. Just try reading it out loud or substituting the word he or she or they to see if it sounds right. You perhaps wouldn't say, "they bakes a cake." So equally, you wouldn't write, "Khan and Jones bakes a cake," or "Khan and Jones argues that." You would say, "Khan and Jones argue that." It might seem like a small point, but it can really affect the overall quality and impression that your writing gives to the reader. After you've introduced the authors and chosen a verb carefully, you will need to paraphrase what it is that the author has said. Paraphrasing shows that you understand what the author is saying as you are explaining it in your own words. You think about how you might explain what you've read to someone else. Paraphrasing is a key academic writing skill, and there isn't time to go into a lot of depth about it here, but the Queensland University resource or the Search Start Guide that are mentioned on this slide here and you can access using the links are a good place to start in terms of learning how to paraphrase well. Like anything, it's a skill which can be learned, and therefore the more you practice, the better you'll get. You can also run your work through Turnitin if this has been made available to you by your tutor. Turnitin matches text in your assignment with text in millions of online sources, such as books, journals, web pages, and the work of other students. So it will pick up if you have not paraphrased sufficiently, so if you haven't put that into your own words, and it's an exact match with something which already exists out there. Be aware though that Turnitin will always produce a certain percentage of your work as matching, and it's not necessarily a problem, but what you should be looking out for is where more than just a few words are matched to a source in the Turnitin database. I've put a link to some further guidance on interpreting Turnitin reports on the independent learning slide that's at the end of this presentation. So if you're not familiar with it or you have questions, that would be a good place to check perhaps later on. So the key point here though is that when you're referring to the research of others, we just need to paraphrase to show that we've read and understood and put that information into our own words. One last point on careful use of language to make your writing more appropriately academic is to make sure you use what are called signposting words or phrases. These words or phrases signal to your reader what is happening in terms of your assignment. It can help them keep track of the points you're making and help them to follow the argument that you're presenting without feeling lost or confused. Since two of the key characteristics of academic writing are that it should be explicit and precise, signposting language can really help you to achieve this. So, if you're adding an idea or making reference to another author who shares the same viewpoint as someone or something you've already mentioned, you could use the word similarly before going on to introduce that next author and then paraphrase what they have said. Alternatively, if you're about to start describing an author who has an opposing view to the one you've just written about, you might use a word like conversely to introduce the next point. It just puts up a flag really to your reader to make them aware of what's coming. If you're making a number of points, you could use signposting language like firstly, secondly, etc. to keep the reader on track, which point are we on? And finally, do you see what I did there? I used a signposting language. Finally, when you reach your conclusion, you can signal that this is the conclusion by using a phrase such as to conclude or to sum up. So again, you can follow the link here for more guidance on signposting from the University of Portsmouth. Okay, so this slide just gives a worked example using the three voices shown in the different colours here. So if you want, you can pause the screencast here and read that through at your leisure. What you'll see is that there's an introduction to the topic of the paragraph given in red. That's our tour guide voice. Then we've got in the green the introduction of the evidence using paraphrases and referencing, showing the work of other authors. So this is the expert voice section. And then finally in the blue, there's some comment in the critical voice or the academic voice. So it's where the writer is commenting on what they make of the evidence or what they think it means, why it's important or interesting, or what the implications are. The next few slides will consider some key features of the particular tone of academic writing, starting by defining what we mean by the terms style and register. When we talk about academic style and register, what we really mean is in terms of register, the vocabulary or the tone which makes the writing academic. Academic writing mainly uses a formal register. Think about how you might change your tone and your choice of language if you're in a formal situation like a job interview, compared to how you might speak if you're at a social event with good friends. So academic writing needs the formal style and register. So registers are functional. They function in different types of situation. So we need to use the appropriate register for the appropriate situation. So our academic register is the formal register. We're using formal language, not informal phrases or slang or abbreviations. So the term style is also occasionally used to refer to that need to have the appropriate tone for the appropriate situation. But it also includes variations in grammar structures too. I wouldn't get too tied up about the difference between style and register. Just take from this slide that in academic writing we really need to use a formal approach. Have a look at this extract from a student's introduction to an assignment about the impact of social media on mental health. What do you notice about this in terms of the style or register? Look at the vocabulary and the tone of the writing. Okay, let's have a look at some of the things that hopefully you've picked out. First of all, the phrase lots of people. This is really vague. How many people is lots of people? Academic writing needs to be more precise and accurate than this. So this kind of phrase wouldn't be appropriate. Similarly, the writer here has used this phrase, lots of people around my age. They're making an assumption that we know how old the writer is. What age are you? What age are you talking about? So again, it's not precise, it's not accurate, and doesn't meet the criteria for good academic writing. Next, we've got an example of the use of the first person. I think that. So this person's kind of writing as they might speak to their friends, rather than using that more formal third person style. An alternative here might be, some people expect that this is okay. Next, we've got the use of the word doesn't. This is what we call a contraction, where the two words does not have been contracted into one word. Using contractions is informal, so in our formal academic writing, we spell out words like this in full. Does not, is not. It does use up more words, but if you use contractions, then you are using an informal style of writing, which is not academic. Next, we've got some very informal phrases like let's face it. So again, we've got a contraction in there with the word let's, and let's face it is very much the kind of language that we would use when chatting. The other problem with this particular section where it continues, where would we be without it? This is what we call a rhetorical question. It's almost as though you're speaking directly to the reader. So in a way, it's almost like using the first person. Also, the problem with rhetorical questions, which haven't been answered, are that they leave your reader unclear as to what the answer is. So academic writing should not leave our readers unclear as to the answer. We should be clear and precise in what we're saying. So posing questions that sort of dangle without being answered doesn't really fit with the academic style. Last couple of points that you may have picked out, these kinds of things, again, it's just really vague. What kinds of things? Be specific. And the last few years, well, again, how many years is that? Is it 2, 5, 10, 50? You need to be specific. Also, you may have noticed that there are no references or evidence from any academic literature. This is purely the writer's opinions expressed in writing. And writing stops being academic when you are writing as you speak or making assumptions about the reader. When you don't tell the reader what your aim is in writing, what is this about? What is the writer going to be doing or achieving in this assignment? We really don't have much direction on that. So here's another example of an introduction to the same assignment. I'm just going to pause for a moment and let you have a read. Just think about what is different about this one. What's going on here that maybe makes this more academic? Okay, so perhaps some of the things you noticed are, firstly, there's a much more formal vocabulary. Social media usage is a phrase that's been used here, compared with Facebook, Snapchat, and things like that were in the previous example. You've probably also noticed straight away that there are references shown in the brackets, and the use of evidence from academic sources is demonstrated here. The author has written about these works in the third person. So, for example, they've said, Zen's work will be critically explored, rather than I'll be critically exploring Zen's work. We can also see the use of what we might call tentative or cautious language. Zen's suggested. So they've chosen that verb suggested perhaps quite carefully. It's leaving room for the possibility that Zen is not 100% correct in their view. So to help you develop your vocabulary, I really recommend the resource called the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank. Basically, it's a database of appropriate academic words and phrases which you can search for, choose a word or phrase and use it in different places in your assignments. Most students I've shown this to say, oh, I wish I'd made use of this earlier, or I wish I'd known this existed earlier. So the idea is you can search for a phrase if you're wanting to, write an introduction, or you're wanting to have a section which criticises something that you've read, and you're searching for the words to use or how to kind of get started. So you look on the phrase bank, get some inspiration. You can copy and paste the phrases directly. It's not plagiarism. It's a resource that's there for students to use. And the more you use it, the more you'll become sort of equipped with a better vocabulary of your own, and the less you'll need to use it. Okay, so I wanted to start wrapping up by providing a summary of the key features of academic writing. So what is it that makes academic writing different from other types of writing? And if I could sum it up in just a few words, what would they be? So firstly, academic writing is complex. It maybe has longer words, but this is not about trying to sound clever. Your marker still needs to understand what you're writing. So complicated ideas don't necessarily need to be expressed using very complex language. It's more about, are you getting that message across? Secondly, it's formal. Words and phrases are more formal. Just think about the tone of your writing and make simple changes to your phrases. For example, instead of saying something like, this backs up, you might say, this supports. Thirdly, being precise. So the facts, the numbers, the percentages that you present are precise. There's no room for inaccuracy in academic writing. Check the quality of the sources you are using and only use the most reliable. For example, Wikipedia is not the most reliable source. Instead, look at the more reliable references or further reading lists that often feature at the foot of the page if you're on a website. Next, writing has to be accurate. You'll use a lot of technical language in your discipline, and you must make sure that you do not use the wrong terms. Academic writing also requires good structure. It's got to be organised so that the reader can follow the argument as clearly as possible. Remember to include an introduction, a series of main body paragraphs, and a conclusion. And if you use the paragraph structure with the 3 voices, that will bring an element of organisation into each paragraph as well as to the essay as a whole. Next, academic writing should be objective. Very little in academic writing requires your personal opinion. Instead, you're contributing to an academic debate about something. So you have an opinion, but this must be expressed objectively, so in a balanced, unbiased way. You will have weighed up the evidence very carefully and come to a considered position. So academic writing has far less emphasis on you and more emphasis on what it is you want to say. Okay, last couple, hedging. It's quite a difficult feature to understand. In academic writing, you have to make decisions about your stance on a particular subject or the strength of the claims you're making. Be careful not to make strong claims such as "this proves" if you can't absolutely back it up. Instead, we use hedging language, or maybe cautious language is a better way to describe it. So we might use a phrase such as "it could be suggested that," or "one possible reason is." If you're struggling to find the appropriate kind of language, refer to that Manchester phrase bank that I mentioned earlier. Okay, last feature of academic writing would be that you have to take responsibility for what you say and provide evidence for any claims you make. So this might mean justifying why you do or do not agree with what an author has said, as well as making sure you're referencing correctly. Okay, I thought I'd bring this to a close with a sort of quick checklist of do's and don'ts. So what not to do and what to do instead. So, firstly, don't write as you speak. Instead, use more formal language. Don't shorten the words or truncate or contract them. So instead, you need to write things out in full. Don't make assumptions about the reader. Just avoid assuming that the reader shares your point of view or that any opinion can be considered common sense. Spell out what it is you think and why you think it. Okay, some more do's and don'ts. Don't forget to tell the reader your aims. Be clear about what's the purpose of your writing. What is your line of argument? This kind of links with the signposting language that I mentioned earlier. Inform your reader as to what is going on and where it's going. Don't make your writing too personal. So avoid using the first person, I. Instead, use the third person. The only exception to this would be if you've been given a reflective piece of writing, or you've been explicitly told that it's acceptable to use the first person. If in doubt, use the third person. Don't be vague and non-specific, using phrases like lots of people. Give quantities and name subjects rather than using it or this. There shouldn't be any doubt or any possibility for doubt in the reader's mind what it is that you're referring to. Okay, this next tip about lists can help you to be concise. Don't create unnecessary long lists. For example, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. That was a long list of phrases used in that first example we looked at. Try to find a word or phrase that describes multiple items. So in this case, social media. Don't use what we'd call colloquial expressions or kind of slang language. It does my head in or something like that. What we need to do is to find some formal, neutral language to express that. So, for example, somewhat confusing might be an alternative. Don't rely on the internet for references. Instead, use peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, case studies. And finally, if I was to answer the question, how do I make my writing sound academic? One of the key things I would want to remind people is that making your writing academic is not about using overly complex or flowery, fancy language to explain something. Sometimes students tell me they need to find a way of sort of fancying up what they've written. And I would tell them, actually, good academic writing will explain the complex ideas and thinking processes that the student's been through clearly in a way that's easy to follow and understand. So this doesn't mean using a longer or more complicated word just for the sake of it. Think about what is the language that helps you to get your message across and be understood. Our academic writing is our opportunity to communicate our thinking. And so therefore the key objective is that we communicate that thinking clearly and effectively, not that we use long fancy words. If you're wanting some further resources on the subject of developing your academic writing style, we have a number of online resources available through the Skills Centre website. You're able to access a resource called Skills for Study Campus. The university subscribes to this on behalf of students. It's kind of an online interactive study guide, and they have resources around academic writing. So you can use the link to find that. If you're looking for a recommendation for some books, there's 3 recommended here. And for more independent learning resources, you could try some of the following websites. So I've mentioned the Academic Phrase Bank from Manchester University already. It's a really rich resource. Do go in there and have a look. Just have a scout about and find out what's in there. It's really extensive. If you're wanting to do some sort of interactive kind of practice, there's some examples and exercises on the Monash website, and you can have a go at things, get feedback, test your knowledge in a more interactive way. And if you want to know more about interpreting Turnitin Reports, you can link through to this document which explains a bit more about how Turnitin works and what kind of use you can make of a feedback report that you may get from Turnitin. So for more information and sessions on academic skills, you can use these links or visit our website to see what's on. The Skills Centre runs a mixture of larger and smaller group sessions and one-to-ones, and we've got a wealth of online resources, including study guides on lots of different topics, from planning and structuring assignments to critical writing through to planning and writing up your research. If you're not sure what you need to develop next, you could use our Skills Check tool to complete a self-assessment of your skills, and then you'll be given personalised recommendations as to which of our resources you should visit next. And finally, I've just provided some links to other useful resources from across the university. But I do hope this screencast has been helpful to you, and I hope to see you at a Skills Centre session very soon.